From Eyewitness News, this is Newsmakers.
Strike one in the pitch to bring the Paw Sox to Providence. Governor Gina Raimondo wasn't keen on the plan to use $120 million over 30 years to build a stadium on state land. It's back to the drawing board for Paw Sox owners Jim Skeffington, Larry Lucchino and company. The question is how many strikes before the deal is out? Plus, how is the governor going to deliver on her campaign promises to jumpstart Rhode Island's economy? Our guest this week on Newsmakers, Governor Raimondo's point person on the economy, Rhode Island Commerce Secretary Stefan Pryor. Welcome to Newsmakers. I'm Tim White. Joining me on the panel is WPRI.com reporter Ted Nesi. Mr. Secretary, welcome to the program. It's really good to have you.
Thank you, Tim and Ted. Glad to be with you.
Let's talk about the Paw Sox off the start. The initial deal proposed by the owners, as I said right there, fell flat. Was it solely about the financial commitment they wanted from taxpayers? To remind everybody, that's $120 million over 30 years. Or is there other reluctance there? Say, is there reluctance to use that land for a ballpark?
We do need to determine whether that land is feasible. There's some utility moves that need to happen, and we need to know that this ballpark will contribute positively to the revitalization of the 195 area, that corridor of land that's been left vacant when the highway was moved. But it is substantially about the financing. $120 million over 30 years, that's a lot by anyone's standard. And we need to know that there's going to be a real return on the investment. What are we going to see in the way of vitality in that area? We need to create a deal that's more fair for the taxpayer of Rhode Island. There are a variety of ways to do that, lessening the burden on the taxpayer in terms of the public investment, the balance between public and private investment. There's also the possibility of sharing in the upside of seeing very concrete ways that this project can contribute to the broader build out of the 195 corridor. There are different ways that we can solve this, that we can see progress, but $120 million of public investment over 30 years without some of these other conditions and without making a fairer deal for the Rhode Island taxpayer, that's tough.
So less skin in the game for the Rhode Island taxpayer, essentially. Have there been other discussions with the Paw Sox ownership group since that deal fell flat?
Yes, there have been ongoing discussions. There was a formal meeting of the 195 Commission with the owners of the Paw Sox. There have been ongoing discussions all through. We're still awaiting some information from the team ownership.
What information are you waiting for?
We'd like to have some backup on their dollar estimates. How did they arrive at $120 million? There are a number of nuances that would go into that. We'd like to understand more specifically their plans about how this project would physically fit in the space, analyze their traffic study more thoroughly, understand there's been a reference to the possibility of some public open space, 3+ acres of public open space surrounding the ballpark. How would that be configured? Can they explain the layout of it? What kinds of public amenities are being offered to the state that would be financing this substantially?
So it sounds like one option for you, just an option, but you'd look at is some sort of profit sharing agreement, like they make a certain amount of money and then the state gets a share after that? Is that what you're saying?
It's too soon to lay out any kind of a specific solution, to put a counter proposal on the table. It's too soon. We need to understand the facts and figures, but there are a variety of ways to go about this. There are ballpark transactions, ballpark deals, if you will, across the country that have been creative and that have had lower burdens for the taxpayers in the given jurisdiction. We'd like to create a deal that's more fair in that way.
One of my questions, are there examples of jurisdictions you think have done this right in other parts of the country?
You know, I wouldn't point to any single deal, and I think it would be premature to identify even a collection of them and say these are the ones we want to borrow from, but I can tell you that we are looking at them. We've hired some consultants who are professional consultants that work on economic development transactions and actually work on sports venues specifically in preparation from receiving information from the team after their initial proposal in preparation. And we're going to look closely at the elements of those deals that were good for the taxpayers in those places.
I got to tell you, all of that work that you want to get done, you're waiting for stuff from Paw Sox ownership group, you have some, you're doing your homework there, and you have some consultants going out. That seems like a lot to get done in the timeline that the owners want it to get done by the end of June, I think, 2 months. Is that too brisk a timeline for the state?
It very well might be. It's fair to say that, Tim. The timeline that the owners have set forth is ambitious. They want to be in a new stadium in about 2 years. That's very ambitious. Now, we respect that aspiration. The Paw Sox are a treasured team in Rhode Island. The owners seem genuine in their interest to stay in Rhode Island. We're working with them intensively and collaboratively, but they've got to come forward with information so we know if it's at all realistic, not just in terms of putting the financial deal together, but physically getting in the ground, moving utilities, getting construction going. There's some regulatory reviews and approvals that are necessary. These were federal lands that were transferred to the state with conditions. There's a lot that could affect the timeline. It's a very real issue.
So, so to be clear, you're saying that it's possible we, the taxpayers, the citizens of Rhode Island, won't know by the end of June whether or not there's a deal. You know, Jim Skeffington suggested to me the other day, well, by the end of June, we'll know whether we can do one or not, even if we're still dotting the T's and I's. You're saying that we might still be up in the air.
It's sensible to look at the time period that corresponds to the legislative session, the General Assembly's session, which presumably runs through June. And it's sensible to aim to have a conclusion. What we certainly will know whether or not the legislative session has had the opportunity to grapple with the issue. I know there's high interest from legislative leaders, the Speaker and the Senate President, in dialoguing about this question. We're all engaged with the issue, but it is too soon to say, even though it's very close to the deadline. It is too soon to say whether we'll be able to meet it.
Do you know how much the land is actually worth, the parcels they've identified? Is there an estimate that you have of how much that's worth?
You know, it's tough to say because a substantial portion of the land was designated for park purposes, and therefore it didn't actually have economic value as a park, but if it were to be converted for commercial purposes or for sporting purposes or for entertainment purposes, what would its value be? So no, we don't know the answer yet, and that's a point for our negotiation.
And will the federal government let you convert? They required us, Rhode Island, to put parkland in that 195 area as they move the land. Will you have to build a park somewhere else? Have you gotten any sense of how that'll work?
In all likelihood, if a park is displaced, you need to replace it. I'm not sure that it's 1 for 1, 1 acre for 1 acre. But that's why it's helpful that the team has stepped forward and said, you know what, we can build some public space, including some public ball field space. We need to know more about that, more than just the initial words and the initial sketches. By the way, those are welcome and good, but we need to get further along and determine whether in the 195 stretch or in surrounding areas there might be possibilities for more public space.
The key to leverage in any deal is having the ability to walk away. If you're buying a car and you go into the dealership and you're going to walk out, that gives you the leverage there. Is the Raimondo administration willing to walk away from this deal, even if it means the Paw Sox go to Massachusetts?
Look, that is a determination for the governor and, for that matter, for the General Assembly leadership.
But you've talked to the governor. You must know what she thinks.
Let me say this. The initial proposal was not fair to the Rhode Island taxpayer. We do need to see a new proposal in order to move forward.
There are plenty of Rhode Islanders who don't want any proposal. We hear it in our inbox, Tim and I. You know, they don't want a dime from taxpayers to go into a new stadium. They say absolutely not. You know, they don't want a subsidized stadium in around. What do you say to those people? People who just aren't on board with public money going to a privately owned ballpark?
Well, we have more than sympathy for that position. We fully understand that position because the governor has closed a $190 million budget deficit. We're engaging in the restructuring and really the improvement of the Medicaid program, but achieving serious savings out of Medicaid. We're trying to invest in economic development all the while. We need to know that these precious dollars that are being freed up for economic development purposes, that they go to good use, that there's a good return on investment, that there'll be jobs for Rhode Islanders over the long term, that an initial investment will lead to follow upon economic activity. We haven't yet seen that this stadium proposal, this ballpark proposal, will meet those criteria for these precious dollars. It is possible that we will conclude that it will. Creating a more 24/7 environment in the jewelry district, creating a liveliness that may be more attractive to businesses and residents alike, that could be valuable. And it could be a puzzle piece that fits into a larger puzzle that's good for Rhode Island, yet to be seen.
We already subsidize McCoy, don't we, as taxpayers?
Effectively, yes. Effectively, yes.
Are you looking for that deal to just be transplanted to Providence? Is that a possibility?
You know, we're not looking for any particular proposal or conclusion. We are right now analyzing the facts as guardians of the Treasury. as the protectors of the taxpayer, we're looking at what's good for Rhode Island. We have decisions to make about the 195 corridor more generally. We'd like to see bioscience and technology more generally, and the knowledge economy flourish in the vicinity of the Brown Medical Center right there in the Jewelry District. The Johnson & Wales presence, URI has substantial activity, the medical centers. We want to build out a corridor that will generate long-term, well-paying jobs for Rhode Islanders. So we have a lot of decisions to make about the way in which we conduct this work.
All right, let's talk about the 195 land a little bit more. We're going to shift gears here, and we're going to talk about the Innovation Institute. This is a big thing on Governor Raimondo's when she was running for governor during the campaign, and she was on Dan York's State of Mind, which airs on our sister station, MyRI TV, and we want to play a soundbite from that. Dan asked her on this what the status was of the Innovation Institute, and here's what she had to say.
I'm working hard on it. I've already had conversation. I'm in conversation right now with Brown and other universities, some in Rhode Island, some not in Rhode Island. I've reached out to a number of companies.
So this is the most detailed information we've actually heard about the Innovation Institute in some time. It's been rather quiet on that topic. Can you expand on that? What is the status of her vision of the Innovation Institute here?
The status is that we are moving forward with heavy-duty work around it. We just retained a team, an external team, HR&A consultants who were retained by the Commerce Corporation to carry out a visioning exercise and to set forth a strategy around the innovation economy, around how research conducted at universities and medical centers can translate into commercialized purposes, meaning businesses and jobs for Rhode Islanders. So we have that underway. We just contracted with them. We've already got work also underway by our volunteer professionals and our actual professional staff. Joe Azrak, who's an experienced real estate professional, was appointed chair of the 195 Commission. So in addition to the ballpark conversation, this is happening with intensity. As the governor referenced in that soundbite, we're having constant conversations with existing universities, including Brown. They've dedicated themselves to the task. We are talking with their academic faculty. We're talking with their administrators who are responsible for technology transfer, that whole idea of taking research and making it into the commercialized purpose. We're also talking with universities beyond Rhode Island and, frankly, beyond the United States
Mr. Secretary,
about different possibilities. How did they do it elsewhere? What are the most effective techniques that have been used? We're in active conversations.
Going back to the ballpark, does that actually get in the way of the Innovation Institute?
That's not necessarily the case. We do need to look closely. We need to scrutinize this proposal. It is a very expensive proposal, and it is not yet fair for the taxpayer. Having said that, could it fit? I referred to this earlier. Creating a 24/7 environment with vibrancy on the street, with real street life, could be outstanding. I happen to live in the Jewelry District. I've moved into an apartment in the immediate vicinity of the 195 zone. I think it's a terrific neighborhood, but I'll tell you, it's very quiet at night. There aren't tumbleweeds per se.
Can you be objective about these plans?
There aren't tumbleweeds per se.
If you want a baseball stadium as your neighbor, we get it now.
And I understand the concerns of neighbors about traffic, but their interest in a positive contribution to the area. These things can be done together. They have been done in other parts of the country, but we've got to get it right if we do it at all.
All right, we're going to take a break here on Newsmakers, and we're going to continue this conversation about the use of 195 land, and we're going to ask the Secretary to diagnose Rhode Island. Stay with us. You're watching Newsmakers. Welcome back to Newsmakers. I'm Tim White. To my right is WPRI.com reporter Ted Nesi. Our guest this week is Rhode Island Commerce Secretary Stefan Pryor. Ted?
We're going to get back into the details of the policy proposals you've put forward, but I want to zoom out a little. You came from Connecticut and before that New York and Newark, New Jersey, where you've worked before. You've been around a few months. You've been talking to tons of companies, tons of organizations, tons of people. What is your diagnosis at this point about what's gone wrong with the Rhode Island economy?
There are a number of things that need to be boosted. You know, as a northeastern state and a beautiful state and perfectly geographically positioned between New York and Boston, on the ocean with rail access and air access and sea access, we shouldn't be a lethargic state emerging so slowly in a struggling manner from the recession. Technically, the recession's over, but it continues here. There are a few different fronts that I think need to be improved. We happen to have a plan about it. It's called the Ocean State Wave. We have it on the table. It's available at commerceri.com. But the plan involves several components. The WAVE stands for four things, WAVE. There's a workforce development component. There's an advanced industries component. There's a visitor attraction or tourism component, which we think could be very promising. And then there's a part involving the enterprises of our state, the businesses of our state. We've got to do all those things. Let's take the two ends. We've got to build a workforce that's strong, because you know what? We're not going to compete on the cost of labor in Rhode Island. We're not going to compete on cost of living in general. We're not even going to compete on construction costs. We're not going to be the cheapest place to build, but we can have the finest workforce. We can have a well-positioned workforce. We can have a well-prepared workforce. That means improvements in K-12 education. That means strong ties to the workforce development programs of our state. We have several ideas on that front. One of them, for example, is we're losing too many of our young people who are either going to college here and then leaving in pursuit of jobs, or going off to college and never coming back. It's the brain drain. It's happening too frequently. We're creating a new fellowship program, the Wavemaker Fellowship Program, where for up to 4 years, individuals who are entering tech fields and other promising fields can have an up to debt-free existence in Rhode Island if they pursue careers here. We've got to create the positive incentives to reverse these negative trends. We also are developing partnerships between high schools, public high schools in Rhode Island, and employers, and the community college system, CCRI, so young people can graduate from high school in grade 12, or for that matter, grade 13, grade 14, with an associate's degree seamlessly in high school and be first in line for jobs with that partner employer.
So I asked about problems and a diagnosis. You went to workforce stuff. Is that
positive
the
people.
bottom?
We offer solutions.
And God bless you, but we're not. We're journalists. So is that the bottom of the pyramid of Rhode Island's economic problems?
I'll tell you,
a lack of skills in the workforce?
Today, I just came from a meeting with representatives of the industries across Rhode Island, convened by the Rhode Island Foundation, a group of intermediary groups. And what I heard most frequently about was the quality of our workforce. Everyone knows that we have wonderful people here who are willing and ready to work, except that there are training gaps. And we've got to fill those gaps. We've got to do the work. So we're restructuring the Department of Labor and Training's programming under our director, Scott Jensen, and under the governor's leadership to really center around businesses, ask them not in a vague way what they need, and offer training programs that are, clever sounding, the so-called train and pray method, where you create a program and pray that it works, but instead going directly to industry representatives and saying, what precisely do you need? How do we tailor our curriculum and tailor our programs to you?
But if there was demand, wouldn't they be getting trained now? Because these companies would say we're leaving profits on the table by not taking some of these workers and training them?
All too often, because of the recession, businesses right here in Rhode Island have had to atrophy their training programs, and for that matter, their research and development programs. So they don't have, in some cases, as robust a set of systems as they would for job training. And by the way, government does channel tens of millions of dollars. It's been estimated at $60 million of federal funds flowing through Rhode Island already for job training. We do have some of the resources we need. We need to tailor them to the needs of business. Let me dive into that E in the wave, though, for a moment, too. We also need to create the kinds of positive incentives for businesses to add jobs. We need to provide access to capital for small businesses. We do not currently have a state-funded business loan program for small businesses. We're going to fix that. It's proposed in the governor's budget that way. Speaking of R&D, research and development, which I referenced quickly, a lot of businesses don't have the funds for it these days, especially smaller and mid-sized businesses, but larger businesses too. We're going to create a voucher program where a business is in receipt of a voucher funded by the state that they can redeem at a college or university or medical center right here in Rhode Island for the research needs to be met for that business to take their business to the next level.
Rhode Island,
These are the steps we need to take.
has been clearly scarred by the 38 Studios experience, and one of the lessons a lot of people took out of that is that government should not pick winners and losers between different companies, between different organizations. A lot of your jobs package doubles down on you personally, the Commerce Secretary, choosing who gets awarded funds, taxpayer funds, to subsidize different projects. I mean, why is the right move for Rhode Island to task with one man, say, we're going to give you a pot of money and you choose who you want to grow and thrive?
I have to question a couple aspects of your question and then go to your central point, which I agree with. Two different aspects of your question I want to question. One is, I don't think the lesson of 38 Studios is that we should never, ever do an economic development transaction again. We should never again invest in job growth through public investment. I think that would be a terrible misread. There was a big mistake made in the case of 38 Studios. I don't think we have to go there. Everyone knows that that was a terrible mistake. There weren't the systems of accountability, and there was some bad judgment exercised, no doubt about it. But we can't lose our nerve. As a result of one very big mistake, we can't lose our nerve. On behalf of the people of Rhode Island, we need to keep investing and keep charging ahead to create an economy that works. So how do we do that? We create programs in this governor's jobs plan that do have checks and balances. For example, we propose a real estate tax credit that will help to fill the gap on potentially catalytic real estate projects that will not only create such projects, but also lead to future developments surrounding them and build our economy. Many states have programs like this. You have to build into the statute, as we have proposed, that you check the budget of the project, called a project pro forma, and make sure there is a real gap and that there are reasonable figures being used in compiling those budgets. And then you have to right size the subsidy for that purpose. But then the funds should not flow until the building is built and there's a concrete asset for the Rhode Island taxpayer to look at and see and for the business to use. It shouldn't just be a bet on a dream.
It's only buildings made of concrete.
on a venture. Those safeguards are built into our program.
One of the investments that the governor wants to make, $25 million, a chunk of money for the 195 Development Fund. How's that money going to be used?
That money will be used in several different ways. There is a 195 commission that the General Assembly, in its wisdom, set up. It's now being very ably led by Joe Azrak, and there was some great groundwork that was laid by the previous leaders. The idea is for the $25 million to be vested in that commission. By the way, not one decision maker, to Ted's earlier question, not just the Commerce Secretary or a successor Commerce Secretary, a group of people of distinction and integrity.
A group of people like the Economic Development Commission who were supposed to vet 38 Studios.
In accordance with rules and regulation and exercising appropriate judgment, in accordance with rules and regulations and parameters, can invest in a couple of different types of things.
All due respect, Mr. Secretary, there were rules that were ignored.
If rules were ignored, then that's something of a different kind. You can't say that you'll never do anything again because rules were broken. I mean, that's a problem that needs to be addressed by the appropriate authorities in government.
Let me ask the flip side of that question then.
Okay.
Is $25 million enough? I mean, that's something Massachusetts has for breakfast.
You are absolutely right about that, and only a portion of said breakfast. You're right about that. The $25 million is aimed at being a match for private investment, in effect. Can we attract an anchor that might be a complement to the activities of Brown and the medical centers and other universities? That if that anchor were to arrive or to be built out, they would infuse their own private capital. Or could it fill a project gap and build out real estate that would be far greater in value? That's the exact idea of it. So it's aimed at being a catalyst, not the totality of the investment.
Would a Rhode Island company organization be eligible for any of the $25 million?
Yes, absolutely. A Rhode Island company or a Rhode Island ed or med, educational or medical institution, would be eligible if they presented a proposal and it was the most catalytic.
Do you kind of already know who you want to give the $25 million to, and that's why it's in the budget?
No, we're in active conversations with many players right here in Rhode Island, some right in the vicinity of the land, some further from it, and also with institutions beyond the boundaries of Rhode Island. There may be synergies there. There may be developers who can bring these different elements together. That, in a way, would be ideal if we could build out with multiple uses. You can imagine, and this is illustrative, there's no decision on this, but you can imagine laboratory space, conference space, office space at reasonable price points that would attract the right kinds of industry, partnerships with universities. maybe even hotel rooms to make this a vibrant area and work for business.
We're running short on time. I want to ask quickly. My understanding of how the bill is structured is that the roughly $45 million in jobs funds, you would have some authority to shift between different programs. Could you add to the $25 million by taking money out of one of the other proposed programs?
There is an element that proposes that there be allowed, because the budget was assembled rapidly. It's hard to precisely size how many dollars should be allocated for which purpose. I think it's important that we establish parameters around that, but I do think it's also important that in collaboration with the General Assembly we arrive at the right level of flexibility, so that, look, if we have a big transaction that everyone agrees makes sense for the 195 land or for another part of the state that could be catalytic, that we can make it work.
You did you know the governor before she?
I did.
How did you know her?
We knew each other from law school. And despite that, she hired me.
Do you have any good stories about Governor Raimondo from college?
You know, it may surprise you to hear this, none that I'm going to say on air.
Oh, I see. You just told that to an investigative reporter.
I will tell you that Gina Raimondo has always been one of the most impressive people I've known. Her intellect and persistence, the combination now, years later, of her private sector and public sector experience, it's a unique mix. It is an honor to work for her, and I think we're going to get the economy moving as a result.
Did you see her being a governor someday? When you met her, you're like, oh, this lady's she's
I
headed
knew
for
she
this.
was headed to high places.
And did she call you, or did you call her? How did that in 20 seconds?
She did call me. She did call me. We've known each other for a long time, going on 20 years, I think. But she did call me, and she was appropriately persistent and persuasive. And I'll tell you, it's one of the things, I already knew her, but I knew that those qualities would help us attract businesses as well.
Rhode Island Commerce Secretary Stefan Pryor, thank you very much for joining us.
It's a pleasure, Tim and Ted.
I'm Tim White. We will see you next week on Newsmakers.